Welcome back to Voices Beyond Labels. We are unboxing neurodiversity one conversation at a time. Today, I have someone that I believe a lot of people would like to hear from, Evelyn Dan Epele. She's a development communication strategist, an advocate for governance, a gender inclusion and sustainable development in sub-Saharan Africa. She has consistently centered human dignity and social inclusion in her work. As a public affairs advisor at Baobab Consulting, Evelyn has spent years using communication as a tool for advocacy and system change. She holds a bachelor degree from All Nations University in Ghana and a master's degree from Georgetown University in the United States. But beyond her professional accomplishment lies a deeply personal story shaped by growing up alongside a sibling with special need. And today, she brings not only policy insight and advocacy experience, but also the lived reality of how special needs of one sibling impact others, caregivers, and entire family structures, while making a compelling case for greater societal empathy, institutional support, and strategic investment in children with special needs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Evelyn Dan Epele.
Oh my God, I get shy when my bio is being read. I'm like, who's this person?
But it's an amazing bio, though, I told you.
Thank you.
So before we get into everything, I've already read your bio, but I want you to introduce yourself to us.
I think I want to just say thank God.
Mm-hmm.
I want to introduce myself by saying thanks be to God. And I'm saying that because, of course, I'm on this podcast to do something that ideally you're not going to find me doing, which is like talking about something that's very personal with me, with my family. I think you're pretty much the force behind all this. And when I think about our relationship as well, coming full circle, this is also a mini reunion.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to know.
Yeah, after 17 years.
It's a 17-year reunion from when we were just young girls in high school and not having the fluency to talk about hard things
like this.
Mostly because we were going through them. And to being women now who are confronting these issues more openly, I think I would introduce myself as someone who was forged from fire. And I'm just grateful to God for being able to be here to articulate something as, touchy as a subject this can be. But nonetheless, I'm somebody's sister, somebody's friend. I always, everywhere I go, like to tell people that I'm a proud daughter of the ancient kingdom of Opobo. I like to say that.
And the chief.
Exactly. Yes, please. I'm the youngest member of the Opobo Title Holders Association.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Tell us about your brother.
Jacob. God has a way of making our stories beautiful. When I agreed to do this episode and I was thinking about the conversation we were going to have, I felt disappointed that, it'd be nice for me to share, especially as a journalist. We try to do something called solutions journalism, where we don't just talk about problems, but we talk about problems from the lens of how can we solve these problems? What kind of solutions? So when I was thinking about this conversation and even solutions, it happened that I had an outing with my family a few days ago, and Jacob, who typically would be the one who is not seen, because he's on the spectrum, people just tend to not look his way, and even when they see him, overlook him or something like that. Jacob then was the one who was recognized. Odumodu Black did a free concert to celebrate Arsenal's victory in the Premier League, and myself and my family were out there partying, and we were backstage, and just having that one swift moment where a superstar like Odumodu Black could spot Jacob. He was dancing backstage and he was very excited, and he spotted him and brought him up on stage and had people say his name and recognize him. It really, in a very short moments to the lead up to this conversation shift my thinking about how I see the acceptability
Yeah.
of special needs children. But ultimately, Jacob was born with Down syndrome. There are a range of developmental and intellectual disabilities that happen to children, but Down syndrome is one of those.
Yeah.
I still remember when Jacob was born, I was 13 at the time. And interestingly, Jacob is the fifth of five children. So my parents already had four kids, and with the four kids before Jacob, I was the third. And we were all born consecutively. Shout out to my dad and mom. It's like my mom and my dad were having kids every year. And I always used to say, like, my siblings and I are like quadruplets because we're born 1 year apart from each other. So my mom went from, so if I was 13 at the time, Benjamin, who is older than I am, was 14. And then our elder sister, Rachel, was 15. Then you had my younger brother, Moses, who was a year and some months younger, about 11 going on 12. So imagine a home where you had like four very vibrant children. I wouldn't say all in their teens because we had one person who was not yet a teenager. And two boys and two girls, very vibrant. In fact, we had all gotten into boarding school at the time. My older sister Rachel and myself were in Federal Government Girls College in Buari. And Benjamin and Moses, the two boys, were in Federal Government Boys College, Apple. I think we were on holiday when my mom tried to articulate news of her pregnancy to us. You can imagine yourself being in JS1 and your mom is trying to tell you she's pregnant, especially at the time when you're even just learning what pregnancy is. And I'm like, pregnant?
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? But it's something my parents at the time were calling a retirement baby because all my mom's kids had gone to boarding school, which I think is also a very interesting part of this story. The idea that all four kids were already in boarding school before Jacob arrived. My mom was in her 40s at the time, and my dad was well off in his 50s because there's a significant age gap between my dad and my mom. Again, when I started educating myself more, I knew that developmental and intellectual disabilities can show up regardless of the age of the parents, because I used to think that was the reason that was the only reason Jacob could have had
Down syndrome.
Down syndrome. So we were all in secondary school. Jacob was born in July of 2004. He brought so much joy to us at the time because, like I said, he came into a home where you had four teenagers. Well, grown-ups is a strong word, but four teenagers. And there was room to sort of accommodate him and share what was at the time just termed a burden, that only one person, I don't believe one person can carry. I'm speaking of my mom. So that's the history of like Jacob and how Jacob came into our world.
Take me back to your childhood. How was it like growing up with a sibling that needed that kind of constant care?
The thing about telling stories in retrospect is that you start telling it as if it was, as you say, reenactment. But if I want to go back to like 13-year-old me, it's not like I woke up one morning and like I am preparing to welcome a sibling that's on the spectrum. It's just something that happened, and it's just something that you wake up into, and your being is like saying, tell me what it was like growing up as a girl. I just woke up one morning and
that was your reality.
That was my reality, right? But I still recall learning on the go. You know how they say this is pay as you go. For us, it was learning as you go. The first one was even just articulating the fact that my mom, who was in her 40s, I was already in secondary school, was pregnant. That conversation on its own was really what matured me as a young person, because then I still remember wanting to even know, what is pregnancy? How did mommy even become pregnant? And all of that. So that phase passed. My mom made it a very fun stage where she really taught us about all of that. And then my mom had the baby. I still remember my mom would be the one to come pick us up from school. Jacob was born in July, which was around the time we were vacating for the long holiday.
Yeah.
My mom typically is the one who comes to get us. My dad was a civil servant then. He was working with the old NEPA that became Power Holding Company. And he had the NEPA assigned a driver to him. So we knew our dad's driver, but it was not in my mother's practice to send the driver to come get us from school. My mom would come get us herself from school. But on this particular occasion in 2004, when we vacated, my dad's driver came to get us from school. So I still remember myself and my sister not wanting to go with him because that's my mother will not send the driver to come get us. We had that understanding as a teenager. So the driver started explaining to us that, oh, mommy is in the hospital. Mommy went to give birth to your brother. So it was the driver that was even trying to articulate that to us. And I can imagine like whatever made my mom to not show up here must have been a serious thing. So after that little hesitation, we followed the driver back home. And instead of even going home, the driver took us to the hospital where Jacob was born. Now, on getting to the hospital, I still remember that my expectation was like, oh, mommy has had a baby. We're going to the hospital to go and see the baby. But all that excitement waned when we arrived. I started hearing things like, oh, mommy had a cesarean session. I was 13 years old. I didn't even know how to spell cesarean. I still struggle to spell that particular word. And I was like, what is cesarean session? And I remember asking one of the nurses, and the nurse was like, oh, mommy had an operation to bring out the baby from her tummy. And I was like, okay, so where is mommy? Where is the baby? And they're like, okay, we can go see mommy first. And we went to see mommy, and then mommy starts telling us that, Jacob, at the time he didn't have a name, that baby had something called jaundice or whatever. They noticed that he had a jaundice, and he was taken to the neonatal units of the hospital. Now, these were very big words for me as a teenager. I still remember in my mind saying, which one can be neonatal again? I thought our own is just to come here, see the baby, and maybe even carry the baby and be going home. And so that was the very first, speaking of how was it for me, that was the first thing I had to contend with was, as a little child, being all these big words being thrown at me and me having to learn and discover what all these big words were about, and even the realities of these words. I still remember the first sight that I had of Jacob was in the neonatal unit. They had put some blue lights or whatever in his face, and I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that my mom had a baby and that was the baby, and something was wrong, and they had to put all that light on him. Jacob came home with us by the grace of God after he was discharged, and I still remember my mom complaining that he was crying a lot more than us. Like, she would visibly show frustration or even say like, oh, Jacob was not a calm baby. He was, constantly showing signs of distress and all of that. So she too was trying to understand it. And that was when she came home with the diagnosis that Jacob was born with Down's syndrome. And I'd always been sort of the family egghead. We went to secondary school together. I'm sure you knew how hot my head was at the time. I've always had curiosity, and I've always wanted to know. So if you give me a big word, before 6 p.m., I found a way to find the meaning of that word, whether it's looking into a dictionary and all that. So I went on a spiral. What is Down syndrome? And that was how, as a teenager, my journey to learning what this was about, knowing that my brother did have developmental and intellectual disabilities and that he slowed down, started. I didn't anticipate or expect education from my parents because my mom and my dad were also sort of learning too. But I talk about boarding school in the beginning because I would say any child that you have weaned to the point that you can send off to boarding school at that age as a teenager was already an independent child. So I had achieved independence for a teenager because I was in boarding school. So I wasn't too dependent on, I wasn't overly dependent on my parents to educate me on what was happening. I was learning, like with my siblings, on the go.
I remember you mentioned something about you and your siblings. You feel like you raised yourself. So how was that like for you?
Everything after Jacob was born started to shift slightly. But I must commend my mom. She has this fantastic ability to make all of her children feel loved to the degree that it's equal. Right. She knows how to do that. My mom is the kind of mom to buy suya and count how many pieces of meat are in the suya and say, okay, there are 20 pieces of meat. Everybody take two to make sure that everyone is happy and everyone is okay. She's always been equitable with her love. But when Jacob came into the scene, I think we by ourselves and what we were seeing in front of us, we knew that we had to cut her some slack.
Yeah.
On days when it felt like the most of her attention was going to Jacob. In fact, we quickly evolved to supporting her to take care of Jacob. So we would take turns to, as little children, teenagers, we would take turns to carry him, we would take turns to feed him, we would take turns to bath him, so that it's not only, when we're on holiday, so it's not only my mom who was doing that. And in the process of showing her empathy, we had to start raising our own selves. I still remember that was around the time that I also started menstruating as a young girl, and I still remember days where I would rather go to my sister, who was 2 years older than me, to nag about my menstrual cramps or I want pad and all of that, simply because intuitively I didn't want to go to my mom because my mom already had bigger fish to fry. So when I talk about raising ourselves, it was the shift that was happening intuitively, where it's like my brothers would expect myself and my sister to cook and make meals because mommy was taking care of Jacob, but we were all young and we are also just hoping that mommy can make some time to cook. But slowly you realize that cooking is directly proportional to eating. If you don't cook, you won't eat. So it improved our cooking. We had to be in the kitchen more as a way of helping mommy and all of that. I think that part was not as difficult. I mean, navigating all of that internally was not as difficult as the external pressures that we were facing from not just how we as family members were taking this, but how the broader society takes this. I think.
So, did you ever feel invincible?
Girl, I'm glad that part of why I'm very delighted that you are the one asking me these questions is because we went to secondary school together. You knew how I was when I was much younger. I'd never really been the kind of kid that was invisible. You had to see me. I mean, look at me. You had to always see me. And I think my dad was a mechanical engineer in NEPA. We had a very larger than life outlook towards life, because at that time my dad was designing hydroelectric power stations. I was learning things that a lot of kids even my age were not necessarily learning at that time, even passively. So I never really, Jacob aside, I'm saying as an individual, even before Jacob came into the picture, I never really was the kind of kid to have had feelings of invisibility. If any other thing, I was widely encountered, right? But I think because I was widely encountered, and maybe with my siblings too, so for me it was my academic performance. I always was at the top of my class, and so that made me famous. People just knew me as, oh, that girl that used to carry first in class, right? So when Jacob was born, what I rather felt was, for the first time, I started learning how to live my life behind the scenes. That person who was always, if they're sending one kid in the class to be the class speaker, I'm the one. Like if someone is reciting something at the assembly, I'm the person. When the Queen of England came to Nigeria, I was one of the kids that were sent to the British Council to welcome her. I'd always been that kid that they would put in the front. So when Jacob was born, I started observing that, for example, when my mom would come to our school for visiting day, because we had something where we're in boarding school. Your parents can visit you once a month, I think the last Saturday or whatever of the month. So when my mom would come to school to visit me on visiting day, I would observe that instead of the typical way, like I would run to welcome my mom, mommy welcome and all that, I would want to wait for my mom to come to my class and all of that, because I didn't want like the broader school to know that that was my mom and that's my brother who is on the spectrum, because some of the girls in boarding school were mean girls, very mean.
Yeah, always.
And they were so mean to the point that whenever they were frustrated about anything, because I can't really recall why most secondary school girls were so frustrated to the point that they just wanted to frustrate others. I mean, I was busy reading my books, maybe they weren't. That's where they would pick up. So they would use that to abuse me. You know, they would point out that my brother was an imbecile. You know, people would literally use those kind of words. So intuitively, I would not want to identify with my sibling and my mom more freely than I typically will when Jacob was not born. So that's what started happening to me, that hiding culture, wanting to disassociate yourself from taking on the identity of your brother, because then people would even attribute that, oh, if my brother was an imbecile, then I also had cognitive disabilities. You know, people weren't, especially at that time, people weren't very caring and very kind or compassionate towards toward what was happening. In fact, there was also in contemporary Nigerian society the wave of conversations around, you know, if we were seen as a middle class family that had money or whatever, that our parents used Jacob for juju. You know, there are people. I want that. I would never forget that one.
I heard that once.
There are people who would say like, "Oh, your parents used him for sacrifice or something." And I remember taking Jacob to get a haircut one time in a salon, and we were in the barbing salon getting a haircut, and the people were talking about us, and someone was like, "Oh, they don't use the pikin do sacrifice, these wicked Nigerians," and all of that. And you don't know at that time, should I defend my parents' honor? Should I keep these people quiet? Should I, you know? And there are days when you can take it. There are other days when you cry on your way home. There are also days where you just watch people being mean. We watch people being mean to Jacob, and we can't necessarily step in. And when we can, we do. I've had a situation where I took Jacob into one of these fast food joints to go buy him ice cream, and as we walked in, I don't know, Jacob has very quick feet, he's very fast, and he just moved to the counter, and as soon as he got there, the salesperson was like, "Come on, get out of there, come on, get out of there." And she was like very hostile towards him and telling him to go. But by the time I made it to the front desk, she immediately switched. I was like, "Oh, good afternoon, ma. Welcome. What do you want to buy?" And when she saw me engaging with Jacob, she then changed her countenance because she saw that I was a paying customer. And she goes, "Oh, my friend, what do you want?" And,
I'll be like, "Excuse you?"
You know, and I had to just call her out, and I was like, "I saw what you did," you know, and, you know, I told her, if you want to be a kind person, you have to ensure that you are kind all the time, right? And if you want to be a mean girl, you have to ensure that you're mean all the time, so that I don't give you kind girl treatment when you are a mean girl, you know, because there's how to engage mean girls and there's how to engage kind girls. So there are times when I've had to school people publicly too, but ultimately the need to hide sort of overpowered me more in my younger age than being more outside and open about Jacob's health.
Was there ever a scenario where someone, maybe in school as a child, publicly just face you and tell you your brother is an imbecile or your brother is that?
Like I told you, and like I keep reminding you, you went to secondary school with me. I was never really the kind of kid that you can walk up to me and come and say that kind of thing. I'm carrying first in your class. Are you out of your mind? I was never really not that kid that anybody would walk up to come and say. So it was usually, in fact, it was as a result of what I would describe now is like, okay, because I'm academically excelling, right? People felt like the only other way to attack me was emotionally, because you can't attack me academically, right? So the only other way was to attack me emotionally. So these things would show up as side talks. These things would show up also as talks in passing. So I'm passing and I hear it. And they will come in as provocation, in more of like, let us see what you can do. There were even times where people would gang up, so to speak, maybe to be hostile towards you and use that as a trigger, where it's like, oh, if you react to this, then maybe you get gang beaten or whatever. And so I also started learning politics from a very young age, where it's like, when I see these things, I still remember as a young child how I dealt with those principalities was through the quotes that was raining when we were young, when they say silence is the best answer to a fool. So in my head, I'll just say, these people are fools, and I wouldn't bother engaging them. That's how I coped with it. But it doesn't take away from the fact that those moments deeply hurt me, to the point that even as an adult now, years has passed. Jacob is 22 now, so going on 23. A lot of years have passed, and I still remember the names, surnames, and faces of the people who did those things. And that just shows you how much hurt it caused. And quite frankly, I don't remember them being significant for anything else other than being mean.
Ignorance, actually, because they didn't even understand what Down syndrome is. But I know you said sometimes when you see your mom come in and but were you ever truly ashamed of your brother?
I think the word that I felt for Jacob was, again, because like I told you, I've always been a curious person, and even up until now, sometimes when I see Jacob sleeping, I always ask myself, is he dreaming? Does he dream? You know how you can go to sleep and have a dream, when you wake up you say, oh mommy, I dreamt that I climbed a mango tree, right? And you can communicate that. I always wonder sometimes, does he dream? What is he thinking? Sometimes when he's looking into the abstract, I'm always trying to wonder, is he thinking about something? Is he seeing something? And because he has that speech delay, and articulating himself is not as fluent as I'm speaking to you right now, I almost don't know what he's actually thinking. And everyone around him, including myself, have to interpret his thoughts on his behalf based on certain cues. So I think instead of being ashamed, I think the word is empathy. Like I felt a lot of empathy for Jacob right from when I was young. Like I always ask myself what I think he's feeling, or what I think he's trying to communicate. Is that what he's actually feeling, or what he's actually trying to communicate? There are times when Jacob had malaria. We take him to the hospital, he was diagnosed with malaria. When you have malaria and you can say, oh my God, I'm having a headache, or oh, I feel like puking. Jacob cannot communicate that. So when he does, I don't know if that is coming from a stomach bite, or whether that's coming from a headache, or whether that's coming from, you see what I mean? And you can't self-medicate him. So you had to do a lot of diagnostics. If you look in the family, you'd see that amongst the siblings, I have a very close bond with Jacob. And that's because, like I said, my curiosity led me to study more about Down syndrome, studying more about how to support Jacob, and really just making sure that every time I spend with Jacob is a learning opportunity to know how to take care of him better. So I wouldn't say that I felt shame, but I also felt the strong need to hide Jacob. And by hide Jacob, I mean hide him from mean
to protect
people.
him.
So the less exposed he was to and even me and him exposed he was to all these people, the more focused I can be in actually helping him as opposed to being emotionally perturbed, by how people were responding to who he is. So to me, that's how I would describe it. But there certainly were times when, like I said, like I'll see my mom coming and I wouldn't say I was ashamed of Jacob in those times. I'll say like I was preventing any kind of attack that would happen on me after my mom and everyone had left, because my peace was connected to my performance. So yeah.
So just like when we started, I mentioned, you also told me when we met, you said, Sylvia, listen, this whole thing doesn't affect just the parents, or it affects the siblings, right? So for some siblings out there that has another sibling on the spectrum or Down syndrome or one of those special needs, how does it affect them? Do you think it affects their mental health?
Well, it affects us in ways that you may not have even considered. I told you about my siblings that there was 4 older of us before you had Jacob. As we were growing up and even seeing more independence, and so for example, having to leave the house for higher education or even for taking a job in another state or even NYSC, there had always been this unspoken need for one person to stay back at home with mommy. And I feel like throughout the years we have always taken our turn to do that. Somehow I feel like it's even my turn right now as we speak, because our father passed in a few years ago, and my mom is widowed now. And again, this is not a conversation that we've called a family meeting and sat down to say, okay, so daddy has died now, who we stay with? No, it's just something that happens via natural selection. That I completed my master's degree in Washington DC. I moved back to Abuja. My sister secured admission to do her master's in Kigali, and she had to leave the country as well. And so when I was in America, my sister was the one providing, she was like the caregiver who was providing direct care for Jacob and my mom, and making sure that, subconsciously it was her job full time. And now as we speak, my sister has left the country and I'm currently in the country, and I have to do that same level of caregiving that she's doing. And same with my brother, who, though he's married now, still tries to live in close proximity to the family house. And we see him like we typically would see him even before he was married. And I know that perhaps if Jacob was not in the picture, my brother could maybe even be living in Lagos or something. And although we have not spoken about it, I know that all of this decision making are happening with respect to the situation at home, which involves like caregiving for Jacob. That is like a rotational thing that we have to do, especially now that we have older parents. My mom is not as agile as she used to be, so she does need that support, and having nurses and stewards and caregivers is also not cheap, so if you want to have a caregiver for Jacob, is also something that requires significant financial investment. And I will tell you that too is not a straight path, because beyond the financial investments is also ensuring that this person genuinely even cares for the child, because we've had stories of caregivers even abusing these children more. Jacob has faced abuse even in school, where we had a nurse go to school with him every day. He was still significantly abused and beat up and things like we've had episodes like that. So we realized over time that the best care for Jacob is the one he gets at home
from family.
Yes.
So that means most siblings end up being caregivers for their
we are
other
all
siblings.
Caregivers in the house. Yeah.
So apart from siblings being the caregiver, do you think they face neglect from their parents?
Yes, is a short answer. But again, remember, like I told you, your empathy grows in this situation. As an adult, I think, and maybe this is self-appraisal, but I think I've become a very empathetic person, to the degree that I even have to learn how to have boundaries sometimes. and this empathy is one that came as a result of growing up with a special needs sibling, right? So empathy for one another. For example, I still remember every time I want to feel very frustrated, I would stop myself from feeling so frustrated because I know that my frustration can further frustrate my mom, right? So, and I know she's doing a lot to not blow up, right? So the neglect was there, but like I said, my mom is the super mom, as you know, like she always tries her best to carry everyone along, so if she was buying cheese balls for Jacob, she would still buy for everybody anyway, but Jacob is the one she will feed it to, and you will feed yourself, right? So again, because of the age gap between us and Jacob, by the time Jacob was growing into a teenager, I was already in my 20s. And I mean, if you don't have problems, Nigeria will give you problems. So we already had secondary things that was occupying us that we didn't necessarily need, like mommy. And then we turned around and started to take care of her, and ensuring that she did not feel neglected. Something I even tried to do lately, which is ensuring that my mom gets proper self-care for her own self, where it's like we've started allowing her to even take holidays to herself, where she can travel without Jacob or without anybody, and have a period of 2 weeks or whatever, 3 weeks, where she rests by her own self and not having to wake up to care for anybody. And it's interesting that when this started, she would still come back home and say, oh, she missed Jacob. I'm like, mommy, we gave you some time to rest and you missed Jacob. And so we've had that. So yeah, the neglect was there, but the neglect was there alongside the feelings of empathy, where it's like, I wish I had more attention from mommy, but I know that mommy cannot give it. You hear me talking of my mom all the time because my father was like a typical working class dad who was either in the sky or on a project. He was seldom home as consistently like my mom.
So he didn't feel it as much.
He didn't feel it as much. So those gaps were there.
Yeah, and emotional neglect too.
Exactly, emotional. And I think we bonded more as siblings, and we sought, maybe that's why we even fought each other more. It's like we sought solutions from one another. So like I told you, it's like if my tummy was hurting me, I would most likely tell my sister first before I tell my mom. And my sister was just like 2 years older than me, so she became the stop disturbing me sibling, because everybody would want to take that to her.
But did you ever have this conversation, either as a teenager or maybe now that you've grown up, with your mom, to tell her how you really felt, or any of your siblings, to tell her how you guys really felt?
You don't sound like a Nigerian. You just sound the British, but
I like to talk about my feelings, and actually,
so like I just pictured it in my head, just trying to tell my mom my feelings. She would so laugh and give you ogbono soup to eat, but no, the answer is no. It's just not a conversation that has happened. I think growing up, the one I know I did was assurance and more positive affirmations, where I just make sure I affirm my mom, and I always tell my mom, thank you. Like I'll just like, mommy, thank you so much for taking care of Jacob, or something, get her a gift or whatever. I started being intentional about doing that. But no, we never really had the conversation. But one of the things I know I did for myself when I moved to America for my master's degree, I had access to counseling and psychiatric evaluation services. As you know, the United States is like a more developed country, and I had access to resources that further deepened my understanding of what I was dealing with and how that even impacted me at a psychological level. I sought therapy for the first time ever in my life, and these were things that I didn't think were helpful tools when I lived in Nigeria, here in Nigeria. I didn't think it was necessary. So I think the most um, the most real thing to say about all of this is that in Nigeria, you have millions of children that are living with intellectual and developmental
Disorder.
disabilities, whereas the Nigerian society is not designed to provide holistic care, early detection, and whether it's financial, psychological, and emotional support
Or
for these
inclusion in the
children
society.
and even the families.
Yeah.
However, I would say that we're making progress. We're in a much better place.
At least we can talk about
today
it now.
than we were so many years
Yeah.
ago. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I would say that most of the tools and resources and what I know about supporting Jacob, especially when it became more, when he started getting older, were things that I learned alongside my illumination in the United States. And I still remember going for therapy and talking about these things. So this conversation that you were like, oh, did you have this conversation with your mom? It was through therapy that I realized that, oh, I'm even supposed to be having these types of conversation. But first of all, is even helping my siblings in their own way and my family in their own way to even better understand the situation they're in.
Yeah.
So in my house, you always find my mom saying I'm a doctor that doesn't have a license, because I'm always the one that would go and study something and come back and bring information. I've done a lot of outreaches to key stakeholders in this space, people who are working to provide solutions to persons living with disabilities more broadly and special needs. I still remember even writing, cold emailing the Levem Humley Center for Intelligence in the United Kingdom, sharing my story and telling them that I was open to using my lived experience to contribute to the research and the work that they were doing to produce communication devices for persons living with disabilities, because I'm very passionate about how do we solve for the special needs amongst us. And these children, I must be honest, they're very gifted in their own way and very talented in their own way. Like Jacob, I've started to see how his special needs helps him to be a better organizer. Jacob makes the bed better than anybody that I can think of. Like when he makes the bed, the lines and the creases are very, very smooth, So these are some of the things that come with just educating yourself and learning more about it. I would like to see more being done, from that level at a policy level. I'd like to see more support for mothers, especially who have special needs children. I'd like to see more done in terms of education, inclusive learning for special needs children as well. And even more specialized schools and institutions that cater to them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In Nigeria, we still, thank God we're talking about it now, but we still have a very long way to go. Like what you said about people saying, saying that your parents used him for juju. It will interest you to know that some Nigerians still think like that up to today. It's still happening till now. So there's a whole lot that still needs to be done, a whole lot. But I really want to know, how's your relationship with your brother now?
Oh my God, I told you we went to see Odumodu Black's concert. My relationship with Jacob is superb right now. I feel that I understand him better. And like I say, I try as much as possible to be his unofficial spokesperson. I always tell my siblings all the time, oh, you speak to Jacob gently, because I observe that when you speak to him forcefully, if you try to impose anything on him, he would push back at it and he will resist you with all that he has. But when you speak to him very calmly and gently, he tends to obey, so I would always do those interpretations for people. I've also started exposing Jacob more. At the beginning of our conversation, I was telling you about a shared moment we had with Odumodu Black. Shout out to Odumodu Black at the Arsenal Champions Party. We had a party for
Arsenal.
Arsenal fans. At this point, do I have to say that I'm not an Arsenal fan? What were you doing at our party? Yeah, my dad was an avid Arsenal fan, so I caught the fever and I went out to celebrate with them. And that's one of my ways of exposing Jacob more in public. I think as a family, we're in a much better place now. When we go to church, we sit in the front pews, and I think because we've changed our own orientation about how we present Jacob, there's even better reception from people. And we don't hesitate to educate people about Jacob. And I think it's a very expensive business too, I must say, because Nigeria is a society where people respect you based on outward things. So it's like if we dress Jacob very well and he's looking so nice, people will respond nicely to him. But if you don't care for him and like even present him nicely, people will still be people. So yeah, my relationship with Jacob is very fantastic now.
Amazing. So we would come to an end of this episode, but I want you to talk to people who are currently in the shoe where you were as a teenager. So maybe a sibling who has another sibling that is autistic or has Down syndrome or has any kind of special need. What would you say to them?
I would say that with this particular situation and any situation that seeks to break you, we should never let what is happening around us define what's happening inside us. You need a lot of space for peace, for acceptance, for self-love. And to make that possible, you need absolute control of your mind, because that's where all of this starts and stops. If your mind is not set right, if your mind is not stabilized to a place where people can say things, you hear them, you don't internalize them, and you don't take any action based on what you've heard, you're going to have a very rough time, responding to all these things, reacting to all these things, as opposed to doing the core task of like educating yourself and others, vibrating to a place where you're more of a solutions thinker than escalating more problems. So I think don't allow what is happening outside of you affect what's happening inside of you.
So it doesn't even matter what the mockery is. They say your sibling is an imbecile or whatever. You don't let it get to you.
You don't let it get to you. That's right. And I think it's interesting that I try to hold out space for people, because you might be ignorant 20 years ago. Some of my friends in high school who were very ignorant and have grown now. Some have even had special needs kids in their families, maybe not them directly, but in their families. And they've had to learn through experience and hopefully have become better individuals. So just holding space for people. But if you know you are in the business of allowing your ignorance to show up in the things you say to people who are currently going through this, just also know that you are hurting them perhaps a lot more than you even anticipated in your meanness, and you might want to cut down on that. So
thank you very much, Evelyn.
Of course.
Thank you, girl.
I should have brought Jacob to this.
You should
episode.
have. I actually wanted to tell you to bring him. I'm definitely
going to holiday. Jacob did not leave mommy. Jacob wants to spend the day with her.
Thank you, girl. So thank you very much for joining us today. And if you're a parent with special needs child, please check on your other children and ask them how they are really doing and listen to them. And if you're a sibling who grew up in this experience, you are definitely not alone, and your feelings are valid. You've been listening to Voices Beyond Labels. I remain your host, Sylvia. Until next time, bye for now.